He opened a restaurant on land his people were expelled from. Then he removed every ingredient that arrived after 1492. The name of the restaurant was Owamni. The year was 2021. The chef was Sherman, Oglala Lakota, and this is not a restaurant review. This is a story about what happens when a people's food is taken from them, and what it costs, in a lifetime, in generations, to take it back. Sherman was born in 1969 on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. Shannon County, where Pine Ridge sits, recorded a poverty rate of roughly 52% during Sherman's childhood, among the highest poverty rates in the continental United States. Unemployment on the reservation regularly exceeded 80%. These are not background statistics, they are the shape of a childhood. They are what a 13-year-old boy calculates when he decides to leave. In 1985, Sherman left Pine Ridge and took a job washing dishes in the Black Hills. The Black Hills, Paha Sapa, in Lakota, sacred ground, the center of the Oglala Lakota world. Ground seized illegally by the United States government in 1877. The courts eventually ruled that seizure unconstitutional and awarded the Sioux Nations $1.3 billion in compensation. The Oglala Lakota and their allied nations have refused that payment for decades because the land is not for sale at any price. So a 13-year-old Lakota boy washed dishes on stolen ground, learning to cook other people's food. He did not yet know he would spend 30 years finding his way back to his own. 30 years. To understand what Sherman found his way back to, you have to understand what was taken, not in the abstract, specifically, ingredient by ingredient. Before European contact, the peoples of the upper Midwest and the Great Plains ate from a larder that has largely vanished from American memory. Bison, wild rice, prairie turnip, sumac, cedar, chokecherries, corn, in 300 distinct varieties. 300 varieties of corn, compared to roughly 6 to 10 varieties that dominate American industrial agriculture today. That loss is not a metaphor. It is measurable in seeds that no longer exist. And it did not happen by accident. Close your eyes for a moment and picture a kitchen. Picture the smell of something roasting, bison fat rendering, cedar smoke, the sharp wild perfume of sumac. Picture a sauce, the deep burgundy of a prairie sunset, wojapi, made from chokecherries, thick and sweet, and tart at once. Picture wild rice, manuman, the Anishinaabe call it, the good berry, spilling from cedar knocksticks into the hull of a canoe. The sound it makes landing is like soft rain on dry leaves. This is the food Sherman grew up without, not because it was gone from the earth, but because it had been systematically taken from the table. To understand how, you have to go back further than Sherman's childhood, further than the reservation, further than the treaties. You have to go back to the food itself, because the food is where the story begins. Wild rice, manuman, has been harvested on the Great Lakes for at least 2,000 years. 2,000 years. That harvest was ancient before the Roman Empire fell, and the Anishinaabe are still defending it in Minnesota courts today. But we will get to that. First, the Three Sisters. If you learned about the Three Sisters in school, you probably learned it as a charming agricultural tradition. Corn, beans, and squash, planted together by native peoples across dozens of eastern and midwestern nations. That framing undersells it by several centuries. The Three Sisters is a precision nitrogen cycle management system. Beans fix atmospheric nitrogen directly into the soil, natural fertilizer, no chemicals required. Corn grows tall, providing vertical structure for the beans to climb. Squash leaves spread wide across the ground, suppressing weeds and sealing in soil moisture. Each plant does a specific job. Together, they produce caloric yields that sustain civilizations. The city of Cahokia, near present-day St. Louis, had more than 20,000 residents around 1100 AD. 20,000 people, larger than the city of London at the same date. The Three Sisters agriculture fed that metropolis. This was not primitive farming. This was the infrastructure of a major city. 20,000 people. And then there is pemmican, rendered bison fat, dried bison meat, dried Saskatoon berries or chokecherries, compressed together into a dense, portable brick. 1 pound of pemmican contains roughly 3,500 calories. That is the caloric equivalent of 12 large eggs or 7 peanut butter sandwiches in something you can carry in a belt pouch. Plains nations, including the Oglala Lakota, carried their winter survival in their hands. Months of nourishment, no refrigeration, no degradation. One of the most calorie-dense portable foods ever developed by any culture on Earth. Sherman grew up on the reservation eating government commodity rations. Canned goods, white flour, lard, processed cheese. The food that replaced pemmican and wild rice and bison on the Lakota table was not indigenous food. It was the food of a policy, and the policy was assimilation. Here is where the story gets harder to sit with. Federal policymakers understood the disruption of traditional food systems as a tool of cultural destruction. This is documented. It is not interpretation. Removing a people from their land severed their access to the plants and animals they had cultivated for millennia. Boarding schools did the rest. Children were taken from their families and forbidden to speak their languages, practice their traditions, or maintain any connection to their food knowledge. A child who cannot ask their grandmother how to harvest manoomin cannot pass that knowledge to their own children. 2 generations of boarding schools, 2 generations of severed knowledge. The food chain, not the supply chain, the cultural chain, was broken on purpose. There is a food that many people associate with Native American tradition: fry bread, golden, crisp at the edges, soft at the center, dusted with powdered sugar, or piled with toppings. You will find it at powwows. You will find it celebrated as comfort food, as heritage. But fry bread is not pre-contact food. Fry bread was born in 1864 from U.S. government commodity rations. The Diné people, often called Navajo, were forcibly marched from their homeland to Bosque Redondo, New Mexico, in what is known as the Long Walk. At Bosque Redondo, the government issued rations: white flour, lard, salt, sugar. The Diné people made food from what they were given. Because you make food from what you have. Because hunger does not wait for justice. Fry bread is a food of survival. It is a food of trauma. It is not a food of pre-contact tradition, and that distinction matters deeply to Sherman. Not to shame anyone who eats it or loves it, but because understanding where fry bread came from means understanding what was lost before it. What was there before? Sherman spent his 20s and 30s working in restaurant kitchens across the country, learning technique, learning French mother sauces and European knife skills and the grammar of a professional kitchen. All of it useful, none of it his. I realized I knew nothing about my own food heritage, he has said. The question he kept returning to was simple and crushing. What did my ancestors actually eat? Not what they were given, what they grew, harvested, hunted, and prepared before any of it was taken. That question sent him into libraries, into conversations with elders, into ethnobotany texts and oral histories and seed archives. What he found there would take another decade to build into something you could sit down and eat. But first, you need to understand the land where he eventually built it. At the edge of Minneapolis, the Mississippi River narrows and drops over a limestone shelf. The Dakota people called this place Owamni Oyunke, the swirling waters. St. Anthony Falls, that is the colonial name, given by a French missionary in 1680. The Dakota had been naming it, fishing it, and holding ceremony at it for centuries before that. In 1863, following the U.S.-Dakota War of the previous year, the Dakota people were expelled from the Minneapolis area entirely, forcibly removed from the river they had lived alongside for generations. The falls became a mill district, then a park, then a tourist attraction. For 150 years, the swirling waters ran through land from which their people had been erased. This is the land where Sean Sherman would open his restaurant. That choice was not incidental. In 2014, Sherman founded a catering company in Minneapolis called The Sioux Chef. The menu was deliberately, structurally built around pre-contact indigenous ingredients: bison, wajapi, that deep chokecherry sauce, sumac, cedar, prairie, turnip. Not one European colonial staple appeared on the menu. No wheat flour, no dairy, no cane sugar, no beef, pork, or chicken. Sherman was not making a political statement for its own sake. He was asking a culinary question. What does this land actually taste like? Without the overlay of 5 centuries of colonization? The answer, it turned out, was remarkable. But what came next? Nobody teaches this part. In 2017, Sherman published a cookbook with his co-author, Beth Dooley, The Sioux Chef's Indigenous Kitchen, recipes built entirely on pre-contact indigenous ingredients. The culinary establishment responded in 2018 with the James Beard Award for Best American Cookbook. The first cookbook centered entirely on pre-contact indigenous cuisine to win that award. The James Beard Awards are the Oscars of the American food world, judged by a national panel of food journalists and industry professionals. The award mattered, but Sherman was already building something larger. In 2020, he co-founded the Indigenous Food Lab in Minneapolis with Dana Thompson, who is Dakota and a member of the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate. The Food Lab is a licensed commercial kitchen and a workforce training program, specifically designed to employ and train Indigenous community members in food business skills. Because food sovereignty and economic sovereignty, for Sherman, are the same project, a people who cannot feed themselves on their own terms remain dependent on systems that were built to replace them. The Food Lab was the training ground. Owamni would be the proof. Now, Owamni is built. The question is, what it was built to survive. What does it mean to serve the food that was here before, on the very land it came from? What does it mean to remove every colonial ingredient from the menu and hand that plate to someone who has never tasted it? Sherman has answered this question in interviews, in writing, and in every dish that leaves his kitchen. Our goal is to get rid of the colonial ingredients and get back to cooking that's in connection with the land, the seasons, and the food systems that were here for thousands of years. That sentence sounds like a philosophy. In practice, it is a supply chain problem. Finding indigenous-owned suppliers for bison, sourcing manoomin from Anishinaabe harvesters, tracking down prairie turnip, Timpsila in Lakota, which does not appear in conventional produce catalogs, building relationships with growers and foragers and seed keepers who are themselves part of the same movement. Every ingredient on Owamni's menu, drawn from pre-contact Lakota, Dakota, Ojibwe, and broader Upper Midwest foodways, has a sourcing story. And most of those stories involve someone who decided, against considerable economic pressure, to grow or harvest or protect a food that the market had not valued for generations. On June 17, 2021, Owamni, by the Sioux Chef, opened its doors on the banks of the Mississippi River, on Dakota land, at the swirling waters. The dishes that arrived at the first tables were the colors of prairie and forest, the deep burgundy of Wahpepah, the pale gold of roasted corn, the earthy brown of bison, prepared with cedar and sumac. The cedar smell lifted from the plates before the food arrived. Sharp, resinous, alive, the smell of a forest, not a kitchen. Diners who had eaten in restaurants their entire lives found themselves reaching for vocabulary they did not have, because they had never tasted this before. Not because it was new, but because it was old in a way that American cuisine had been trained to forget. Every ingredient on those plates was a refusal. No wheat, no dairy, no cane sugar, no beef, no pork, no chicken. 5 centuries of colonial food, gone from the menu as deliberately as the Dakota people had been expelled from the land beneath the building. But the act of removal was not the same act. The menu's removal was chosen, reclaimed. Every bite was not the absence of something. Every bite was the presence of what had been there all along. Think of it this way. Imagine a cathedral whose original stonework was plastered over centuries ago, medieval carvings buried under institutional gray. Owamni's menu is what happens when you remove the plaster. You are not building something new, you are uncovering what was always underneath. The reactions from diners in those first months were something journalists scrambled to describe. Not fusion, not nostalgia, not novelty, something more specific: recognition. Indigenous diners, in particular, describe something that is difficult to translate into culinary criticism. The experience of eating food that your grandparents' grandparents ate, food that was taken from your family's table by a government policy, and finding it not only still alive, but elevated, celebrated, awarded. That experience does not have a word in the vocabulary of restaurant reviews, but it is the entire point of Owamni. Sherman has never framed his restaurant as a museum exhibit. He is not serving history. He is serving dinner. The distinction is everything. A museum exhibit is past tense. Dinner is present tense. Dinner means we are still here. We still eat. This food is still ours. Meanwhile, 30 miles north of Minneapolis, on the lakes of Anishinaabe territory, something else was happening. Manoomin, wild rice, was being harvested the way it has been harvested for 2,000 years. A canoe, cedar knocksticks, the grain falling into the hull with that sound of soft rain. And in Minnesota and Wisconsin courtrooms, Anishinaabe tribal nations were defending those same lakes from copper sulfide mining operations and pipeline projects. Treaty rights, negotiated in the 1800s, guarantee the Anishinaabe the right to harvest manoomin on ceded territories. Those treaties are still legally binding. They are still being fought over. The harvest and the lawsuit are the same act. They say the same thing, in different languages. We are still here. This is still ours. When manoomin appears on the menu at Owamni, it is not a culinary choice in isolation. It is a political act, an economic act, a legal act, and a cultural act, all served in a bowl. On June 13, 2022, the James Beard Foundation announced its award for Best New Restaurant in America. The winner, Owamni, by the sous chef. In the context of a gala evening, the celebration, the ceremony, the industry applause, it is easy to process this as a culinary milestone. A talented chef, a well-executed concept, a deserving win. But step back. Look at what actually happened. The most competitive single restaurant award in the United States, judged by the National Food Press, went to a restaurant built entirely on pre-contact indigenous foodways. The cuisine of a people who were systematically starved, whose children were taken to boarding schools, specifically to sever their relationship to traditional food, whose land was taken, whose food was replaced with commodity rations. That cuisine, that specific, surviving, reclaimed cuisine, was named the best new restaurant in America. The best in America. Sherman did not frame the award as a rival. He framed it as a door opening, not the end of something, the beginning of something visible. And visibility, for a food system that had been deliberately rendered invisible, is not a small thing. But the most revealing part of this story is still ahead, because Sean Sherman is one node in a movement, not its beginning and not its end. Crystal Wahpepah, who is Kickapoo Nation, opened Wahpepah's Kitchen in Oakland, California. Pre-contact indigenous ingredients, community sourcing, a restaurant built on the same premise as Owamni, the food of this land before the land was taken. Brian Yazzie, who is Diné, has built a catering practice in Minneapolis centered on Diné foodways, another kitchen reclaiming another people's table. These are not isolated restaurants. They are nodes in a network that is simultaneously culinary, political, economic, and legal. Across the country, seed-rematriation projects are recovering pre-contact crop varieties from university archives and gene banks, returning seeds to the communities that bred them over thousands of years. Those 300 varieties of pre-contact corn, the ones reduced to 6 by industrial agriculture, some of them are coming back. Not all of them. Some are gone. But the ones that survive are being planted again, in soil that remembers them. In reservation communities, where the poverty rate nationally still hovers between 22 and 24%, food deserts remain a daily reality. The same communities whose food knowledge sustained civilizations larger than medieval London now live in counties where fresh produce is harder to find than processed commodity goods. The Indigenous Food Lab is one answer to that reality. Training indigenous people to work in food businesses, building supply chains that connect indigenous producers to indigenous restaurants, creating economic infrastructure around food sovereignty so that sovereignty is not only a concept but a livelihood. Sherman has said that his work is not about the past. It is about what is possible now, with the knowledge that survived. The knowledge that survived. That phrase deserves a moment. The knowledge survived because people carried it. Elders who remembered how to harvest. Grandmothers who kept seeds in jars. Harvesters who went out in canoes every fall, knocksticks in hand, even when the market did not value what they brought back. The food survived because people refused to let it die. That refusal is what Sherman is cooking. Walk through Owamni's kitchen on any given night. The smells are unlike any restaurant kitchen in the country. Cedar and sumac and bison fat rendering, not the butter and cream and white wine of a French-trained kitchen. The color palette on the line is earthen and vivid at once. The rust of dried sumac, the gold of roasted corn, the near black of wild rice, the crimson of wajapi. The sound is the same as any professional kitchen: fire, steel, expedited tickets, controlled urgency. But the ingredients in the mise en place have been on this land for millennia. Some of them were harvested by the same methods, from the same bodies of water, that fed the people who named the falls outside the window. Owamni Oyunke, the swirling waters, still swirling. Sherman was born in 1969 in one of the poorest counties in America. He left at 13 to wash dishes on stolen ground, and he spent decades learning to cook in a tradition that was not his. And then he spent another decade asking what his actually was. The answer was not a recipe. It was a worldview. For the Oglala Lakota and for the Dakota and Anishinaabe peoples whose foodways anchor Owamni's menu, food is not separable from land. It is not separable from ceremony, from language, from sovereignty. The disruption of traditional food systems was understood by federal policymakers as cultural destruction, which means its restoration is understood by indigenous communities as cultural survival. The food is the evidence that the people survived. Every plate at Owamni is that evidence. The wojapi is that evidence. The manuman is that evidence. The bison prepared with cedar and sumac is that evidence. Not evidence of the past, evidence of the present. We are still here. We never left. The wild rice litigation in Minnesota continues as of 2024. The Anishinaabe are in court defending treaty-protected waters from industrial extraction, the same grain on the menu at Owamni, the same knocksticks, the same canoes, the same 2,000-year harvest, and a legal fight that is happening right now, in real time, to protect it. The seed-rematriation projects continue. The Indigenous Food Lab continues training workers and building supply chains. Crystal Wahpepah is cooking in Oakland. Brian Yazzie is catering in Minneapolis. And at a restaurant on the banks of the Mississippi, on Dakota land, at the swirling waters, a kitchen is open tonight. The menu contains no wheat, no dairy, no cane sugar, no beef, no pork, no chicken. The menu contains bison and manuman and wojapi and cedar and sumac and timpsala and roasted corn. The menu contains 2,000 years of harvest. It contains 300 varieties of corn, collapsed and recovered and still being fought for. It contains a pound of pemmican that could carry a person through a plains winter. It contains a city of 20,000 people, fed by 3 plants working in concert. It contains the swirling waters, still swirling, outside the window. Sherman did not build Owamni to show you where indigenous food has been. He built it to show you where it is going. If you have never eaten manuman, find it. There are Anishinaabe harvesters who sell it directly, and buying from them is itself an act inside this story. If you have never heard the word wojapi, look it up, and then look up where chokecherries grow near you, because they probably do. If you carry any assumption that American food begins with European arrival, let this story be the thing that dislodges it. American food is at least 12,000 years old. Most of it we have only begun to taste again. The plates are still going out at Owamni tonight. The cedar smoke is still rising, and the people who were told, in policy and in practice, that their food was finished are still at the table. The table was always theirs. The swirling waters are still swirling, and a people who were told, in policy and in practice, that their food was finished are still at the table. The table was never theirs to lose. The cedar smoke is still rising. The swirling waters are still swirling, and a people who were told, in policy and in practice, that their food was finished are still at the table. They never left. The table is set. Pull up a chair.